Hey, what's up, guys? It is Wednesday, March 31st. Excuse me. I wanted to make a video kind of running through the information that we are supposed to get out of today's assignment. The videos from this week, like I said, they're a little bit dense. They're a little bit harder to follow. So I kind of wanted to, instead of adding additional resource in my information in my daily lectures, this week kind of just recapping exactly what it is they're talking about, kind of putting it into some easier terms for us. So the first thing that we need to understand is that the way that the Earth has been shaped, right, through these processes over time with plate tectonics forming mountains, forming valleys, our slip strike faults, earthquakes, these big events, or any other like major Earth processes or events like storms, meteor strikes for something crazy like that. But these have been happening forever, and they're going to continue happening forever, right? So like it's not like earthquakes used to happen, or like certain plate movements used to happen and now they don't happen and now we have different ones. No, like the Earth is still just shifting and moving like it always has, and it's going to continue doing that at least into the foreseeable future, right? So these processes are continually happening. And since the world is always moving, the things that are in the Earth or on the Earth aren't necessarily like all evenly spread out, right? Let's think about, like, if I dug a hole just like straight down into the Earth right here, like the things that I'm going to see are going to be different than if I walked out into the ocean and I dug a hole straight down to the Earth, right? Like the different rocks, the different fossils, the different whatever, or if I was in a different country and I did that, right? In some places you might, hit an oil, like an oil pocket, right? And you could have an oil rig there and make a bunch of money, right? In another place, it might just be sand for a long time, and then all of a sudden you're going to hit clay, and then you'll hit other rocks, and then it's just going to be, really hard rocks. In another place, you might find, gold, right? Or you could find diamonds. So it's not going to be the same stuff everywhere. Just like when we look at the surface of the Earth, it's not, the same number of trees and the same number of rocks and the same number of everything, like all over the Earth, right? Things are spread out. So when we say like the distribution of resources, the distribution just means like how things are laid out or how things are given out. So like if I was a teacher and I had a stack of papers, right, and I needed to distribute them to the class, right, everybody would be getting their paper or getting a paper. So it's where those things are going. So like when we say where the resources are distributed in the Earth, it's just like where they're located, right? And it's not even. It's not the same amount of fresh water in every single part of the ground, and the same amount of oil, and the same amount of gold, and the same amount of coal, and the same amount of copper, right? It's different. And different countries have different pockets of these resources, right? And that's what we're talking about, is resources. Like when we talk about resources for a living thing, we're meaning like food and air and water, shelter, mates, right? When we're talking about resources in general, it's like anything that can be used, right? So in class, somebody was like, does limestone count as a resource? I was like, yeah, can you use it for stuff? They're like, yeah, it was in, I forget what it was, like the gummy bears or whatever. One of the labs we talked about earlier in the year, the gummy worms, the way we make synthetic materials, right? Gummy worms are made out of limestone. So that is a resource to make that, right? Or trees, or oil, or wind, right? It could be a resource. Not everywhere on Earth has the same amount of wind or the same strength and like continuous amount of wind, right? Like Nevada has Nevada, Southern California area, like our deserts have like steady breezes. That's why they talk about using those for wind farms. If you put one of those somewhere where it just doesn't get a lot of wind, or the wind just comes in big gusts and then stops, it's not going to work, right? So resources are just things we need. And the natural resources, they're coming from nature, right? So if it's a natural resource, it comes from nature. Talking about different resources, in the video, she talks a lot about copper, right? Copper is pretty cool. I want you guys to watch that video because the way that it forms in the cracks of rocks and the way you find like the veins of copper is pretty cool, because the copper will stay liquefied when the rock has hardened, and it'll like fill the cracks. So that's how they'll find those veins of copper. It's pretty interesting. I'll show some pictures. And copper is super important in infrastructure. So like buildings, like wiring systems. Like if you took apart your computer, right? Please don't. There's lots of copper, right? Or like phone lines or internet lines or whatever. It's common in Reno, or not so much anymore because they've cracked down on it a lot, but like copper theft. So like in construction sites, people would steal copper because it's so valuable and you could sell that copper and make a lot of money. So the map, I'm not going to go through and give you these answers because I want you to watch that video, but there's a map in that video, and it shows where most of the copper in the US is, or not in the US, in the world is found. And I want you to go through and list a few countries that have a lot of copper. And it's interesting because these are all major subduction zones. And what a subduction zone is we've talked about it, right? Convergent boundaries go together and make mountains. A subduction zone is water, like a water plate, an ocean plate, super duper heavy, right? It's got all that land and all that water, right? So if we're thinking about that, when those two plates collide, like a land, I gotta get my hands right. So this will be ocean, this will be land, right? So when they go together, the ocean is gonna go under the land and it starts to make some mountains. So like the Cascade Mountains in Oregon, that would be an example of a subduction zone. And I think it would be fair to assume that there's some copper you could probably find up there. Looking through the questions. What are some important fossil fuel energy resources? Well, we use gas and oil for most everything, right? It could be like natural gas. We use oil. We use coal. Coal is one of the major ones that we use. Throughout time, coal has been one of the most plentifully used energy sources on Earth. Where do oil and natural gas come from? Well, oil and natural gas, believe it or not, come from decomposed, broken down ocean life, like blubbery animals. So whales, things like that died long times ago, and then were buried under sediment, buried down into the earth through the processes similar to like the metamorphic rock, right, where they're going through those changes under that heat and that pressure. It becomes oil or natural gas depending on the processes that it gets. And it's pretty wild to think, like when you fill your car with gas, well, not you guys, your parents, your grandparents, aunt, uncle, whoever, when they fill the car with gas, right, it's like decomposed whale blubber, kind of gross. And coal is very similar, but it's from broken down like plant material in primordial swamps. So like back in the day, like olden time swamps that had lots of plants, and then they get broken down and buried, like maybe a volcanic eruption like buries a swamp, right? And over time it gets buried, heat and pressure turns it to coal. So that's kind of interesting. I want you guys to go check out that video, figure out which country has the most coal. I'm not going to give you that answer. Also, don't have to tell you how much fresh water is on Earth. You can find that in there easy. And then number 12, kind of just to summarize the difference between renewable and non-renewable, because sometimes students get a little confused on this, is that like non-renewable resources are still renewed to some extent, right? Like if I said oil and gas and coal comes from dead ocean life and plants, you could be like, well, there's still ocean life on Earth that's dying in the ocean and plants that are getting buried here. And you're right. The only difference is that those resources take millions of years to make. Like if a whale died today and got sunk to the bottom of the ocean, that's not going to be oil for like millions and millions of years, right? And we're not going to be here in millions and millions of years. And we're going to use up all of our oil and gas and coal long before those millions and millions of years come, right? So that's why we consider them non-renewable, right? So like they will be renewed, but way slower than we're using them. So we consider something a non-renewable resource if we consume it faster than it replenishes, okay? A renewable resource is something that is just going to keep getting replenished over and over. So like the sun, right? Like if we have solar panels, you don't put out a solar panel and then we have to be like, ooh, turn the solar panels down. The sun's getting tired, right? Like we got to let the sun recharge. It doesn't work like that. You put out as many solar panels as you want, you get as much energy as you want. Or like wind turbines or water turbines, like the water's going to keep flowing through, the wind's going to keep blowing through. Those would be considered renewable resources because we can renew them just as quickly as we're using them. But non-renewable is that we use it faster than we can replenish that source. Okay? Sweet. So I didn't give you guys everything in here because I want you to go back and I want you to watch that other video because it's got lots of good stuff in there. But this should help get you a lot of the information that you need, kind of hopefully help break it down a little bit more for you guys. Remember, I'm always here if you need anything. Any questions, feel free to let me know. Hope you guys have a great week. See ya.